The film starts with an ancient tale from the 6th century BC, when people believed that spirits of the dead could take control of the living and speak through their stomachs. This belief led to the coining of the term ventriloquist. As the opening credits roll, footage is shown of an unseen man meticulously designing and then constructing a ventriloquist doll from scratch. It is a relaxed evening at the apartment of a young couple, Jamie and his wife. Jamie struggles in vain to fix their kitchen sink. When he opens the apartment door, he finds a large nondescript box on the floor. The sender is unknown. They open the package and find a male ventriloquist doll dressed in a suit and tie, with wide, unsettling eyes. Jamie's kind-hearted wife assumes it's just a practical joke. She even mentions an old urban legend from their hometown about Mary, a frightening woman known for her collection of dolls. Jamie leaves to pick up their dinner from a restaurant. Meanwhile, his wife places the doll on their bed and covers it with a blanket. Soon after, strange occurrences begin in the apartment. Lights flicker on and off, and appliances malfunction. The kettle on the stove starts whistling, prompting her to turn it off. Then, she hears the faint sound of a child's laughter coming from the bedroom. Returning to the room, she approaches the bed to lift the blanket. However, the blanket flies off the doll and suddenly wraps around her face. An unseen force slams her against the wall. Blood streams from her mouth as the same force drags her back into the bedroom. Jamie returns home with their food and a long-stemmed rose. The kettle is now furiously boiling on the stove, and he rushes to grab it. He calls out for his wife, and a faint voice replies from the bedroom. Upon entering, he finds the room dark and accidentally slips on a pool of blood. He turns on the light and sees his wife lying on the bed, covered by a blanket. She beckons him closer, telling Jamie that she has a hormone surprise for him. However, near the end of her sentence, her voice abruptly shifts to that of a raspy old woman. He pulls back the blanket and is horrified to find his wife lifeless. Her body is posed like a mannequin, and her mouth is unnaturally gaping open, forced into the position. Her tongue had been ripped out. Jamie stumbles back in shock and bumps into the ventriloquist doll lying on the floor. The police arrive and remove his wife's body. They immediately suspect Jamie, as there are no signs of forced entry into the apartment. Lacking a solid alibi, Jamie insists to the detective that his wife's demise is connected to the eerie ventriloquist doll that mysteriously appeared that night. He explains that, in their hometown, ventriloquist dolls are considered harbingers of demise. Upon returning to the apartment, Jamie rips the velvet lining inside the box in which the doll arrived. Beneath the fabric, he finds a wooden illustration depicting Mary and the doll, advertising their show at the town fair. This confirms Jamie's suspicions. Without hesitation, he packs his bags and takes the doll with him, returning to the vast estate where he grew up. Jamie's new stepmother greets him at the door. His relationship with his cruel and abusive father has always been strained, so he pays little attention to his father's new wife. Years have passed since Jamie last saw his father due to the latter's violent outbursts, so he is taken aback to find his once merciless father now confined to a wheelchair. His father looks frail and sickly. The stepmother explains that he suffered a stroke months ago and has since been dependent on both a wheelchair and an oxygen tank. This experience has given him a newfound perspective on life, and he wishes to make amends with his son. However, Jamie has no interest in rekindling family ties. His only concern is uncovering the truth about Bloody Mary, and why the town is so terrified of her and her dolls. Jamie vividly remembers how his now-deceased mother once recited a chilling poem to him, warning against Mary's eerie stare. When he brings this up, his father dismisses it as mere small-town superstition. Realizing that his father won't provide the answers he seeks, Jamie decides to leave. As he steps outside, his stepmother follows him and pleads with him to reconsider. She insists that his father has truly changed. But Jamie remains unwilling to forgive and forget. He reminds her that his father drove his mother to take her own life. His second wife also abandoned him, unable to endure his abuse any longer. After his visit to the house he grew up in, Jamie heads to the town's funeral parlor. There, he speaks with the mortician, who informs him that he will retrieve his wife's body once it is released by the police. Jamie then checks into a local motel, where he struggles to fall asleep. The neon sign outside flickers intermittently through the window, casting an eerie glow into the room. Sitting on a chair in front of his bed is the grotesque ventriloquist doll. As Jamie drifts into a deep sleep, the doll's eyes begin to shift and move. He suddenly awakens to find the doll now positioned much closer to him. In the corner of the dimly lit room stands old Mary, staring at him with a chilling intensity. Panicked, Jamie quickly switches on the light, but the old woman vanishes, and the doll is back in its original position. Later that night, the mortician unloads Jamie's wife's body from his vehicle and places it onto a metal slab. However, before he can begin his work, his eccentric elderly wife sneaks into the cellar, muttering cryptic warnings. Frustrated, he urges her to leave, but she insists that she will not find her down there. After guiding her back into the parlor, the mortician proceeds with embalming the corpse. The funeral takes place the following day at the town's cemetery. Among the attendees is the mortician's wife. She corners Jamie, whispering that Mary was responsible for his wife's demise and that she is here. Her unsettling words send a shiver down Jamie's spine. The mortician soon arrives and apologizes for his wife's strange behavior, but once they leave, Jamie makes a disturbing realization. He is standing directly at Mary's burial site. Jamie returns to his motel room to retrieve the doll. He drives back to the cemetery and takes it to Mary's grave. Next to it, he finds a smaller grave bearing the same name as the doll. Digging it up, he discovers an empty coffin inside. Jamie carefully places the doll back in the coffin. As he lowers the lid, the doll's head slowly turns to look at him. It even follows Jamie to his car and vanishes into the darkness. Back at the motel, Jamie is ambushed by the detective handling his wife's case. The detective had dug up the doll again, curious as to why Jamie would go to the trouble of burying it. Jamie insists that he was not attempting to hide evidence. He explains that according to legend, Mary was buried with her 100 dolls, and anyone who encounters her must never scream, or she will rip out their tongue. The detective remains skeptical and continues to view Jamie as the prime suspect in his wife's demise. The following morning, Jamie seeks out the elderly woman for answers. However, she is visibly frightened and refuses to respond to his questions. Instead, the mortician steps in and reveals that his own past is tied to Mary. He recalls that when he was a young boy, the town was thriving and home to a grand theater. One day, he attended a show featuring Mary as a ventriloquist. The mortician himself was part of the show, as the doll had been hidden beneath his seat. But the act was abruptly disrupted when a loud-mouthed boy in the audience pointed out that he could see Mary's lips moving. Mere weeks later, that same boy mysteriously disappeared. Suspicion fell on Mary, with many believing she had silenced the boy for his remarks. Not long after, Mary herself was slain. Her will contained an unsettling request. She wished to be buried with all 101 of her dolls. However, there was another bizarre instruction directed at the mortician's father. The mortician recounts how he personally witnessed his father transform Mary's corpse into a doll, replacing her eyes with wooden doll eyes and unhinging her mouth. After Mary's demise, the town fell under a terrible curse. For generations, families were struck by eerie and violent ends. Their tongues were torn out, and their corpses were grotesquely posed like mannequins. Jamie's wife, it turns out, was merely the most recent victim of this long-standing curse. Determined to uncover the truth, Jamie heads to the old theater. Once a grand venue, it is now decrepit and abandoned. Mary had lived in one of the upstairs rooms, which remains coated in dust and cobwebs. Many of her belongings still lie undisturbed. As Jamie searches the room, he finds an old sketchbook filled with intricate drawings of dolls and human anatomy. It becomes clear that Mary had been obsessed with crafting the perfect doll. The next pages reveal an unsettling discovery: an old photograph of the missing Big Mouth boy, complete with his full name. Jamie's breath catches as he realizes the boy was one of his ancestors. As the weight of this revelation sinks in, he suddenly spots Mary's reflection in the mirror, but when he swiftly turns around, she has already vanished. Meanwhile, at the funeral parlor, the mortician stumbles upon his wife speaking to the ventriloquist doll. Angered, he snatches it away and locks it inside his laboratory. Moments later, he hears his wife's voice calling from the cellar. Assuming she has wandered inside and gotten stuck once more, he crawls in to help her. However, he soon realizes it is a trap. Mary has lured him into her grasp. She materializes before him, tormenting the image of his younger self. The mortician is unable to hold back a scream, sealing his fate. The sound of his own voice grants Mary the power to take his life, and his voice along with it. Jamie, still searching for answers, returns to his childhood home. Inside, he finds his father and stepmother calmly having dinner. Without hesitation, he demands that his father reveal their connection to the Big Mouth boy who disappeared all those years ago. His father finally confesses that the boy was Jamie's great-uncle. When he vanished, the family was convinced that Mary was responsible for his demise. Fueled by their suspicions, Jamie's ancestors, along with other townspeople, formed an angry mob and stormed Mary's home one night. They forced her to scream before cutting out her tongue and ultimately ending her. The father explains that everyone who has fallen victim to Mary's curse was either directly involved in her demise or a descendant of those who were. Mary only targets those who scream in her presence because her own tongue was taken from her. Turns out, his father's cruelty toward him in the past was not mere malice. He had deliberately pushed him away, hoping to keep him far from their town and safe from Mary's vengeance. As Jamie processes this shocking truth, the detective reappears, confronting him with fresh accusations. He insists that Jamie has been lying about the legend of Mary, stating that when he questioned the townspeople, they all denied knowing anything about her. But there is something even more disturbing. The detective has uncovered evidence that all 101 of Mary's dolls have been stolen from the cemetery. Before Jamie can respond, his phone rings. A garbled voice, barely recognizable as the mortician's, urges him to come to the old theater. The voice insists that proof exists there, evidence that will exonerate Jamie from his wife's case. Without hesitation, Jamie races to the abandoned theater. He immediately heads upstairs to Mary's former room, believing the mortician is waiting for him inside. The detective arrives at the theater shortly after, armed with a shotgun. As they stand in the dimly lit space, they hear Mary faintly humming from a nearby room. Jamie warns the detective not to scream, no matter what happens. The two men make their way through a narrow tunnel, eventually emerging into the attic of the theater. Inside, all of Mary's dolls have been returned to their glass cases, except for the boy doll that had been gifted to Jamie. In the far corner of the room, a figure is draped beneath a velvet cloth. Jamie cautiously pulls the cloth away, revealing a doll-like boy with striking red hair. His limbs are fastened with strings, suspended in the air like a marionette. Jamie steps closer, inspecting the figure before saying, "It isn't a doll at all. It is the rotted corpse of the Big Mouth boy who once humiliated Mary during her performance." Mary had indeed slain the boy, and after his demise, she transformed his corpse into one of her dolls. A chilling sensation fills the attic as, one by one, the dolls begin to turn their heads toward Jamie and the detective. To the side, a clown doll rocks gently in a chair, as if relishing the unfolding horror. Jamie calls out to Mary, and she responds in a raspy, aged voice. She explains that in her pursuit of creating the perfect doll, she used a combination of human and doll parts. Now she is determined to silence everyone who had wronged her. Jamie demands to know why she took out his wife. Mary beckons him closer, then reveals that his wife had been pregnant with Jamie's child. By taking both the mother and unborn baby, she has successfully erased the bloodline of the Big Mouth boy forever. For her own twisted amusement, she extends her grotesquely long tongue and licks Jamie's face, though she spares his body, which reeks of fear. Jamie recoils in disgust as the detective fires his shotgun at the clown doll, but Mary simply shifts between her many dolls, escaping from one toy to another. Realizing that fire is their only hope of weakening Mary, Jamie and the detective set the dolls ablaze. As they flee the theater, Mary retaliates by causing the bridge ahead to collapse. The detective lets out a terrified scream, and, in an instant, Mary claims his life. Jamie barely manages to swim to safety and scramble into his car, but one doll is still unaccounted for. Determined to put an end to this nightmare, Jamie rushes to the mortician's home. There, he finds the mortician's wife cradling her husband's lifeless body. Through sobs, she tells Jamie that she saw his father take the doll before leaving. Jamie speeds to his childhood home, desperately searching for his father. He finally locates the last doll in one of the rooms. As he switches on a nearby lamp, his breath catches at the sight of his father sitting eerily still in the corner. Tentatively, he reaches out a hand, only for his father's body to slump forward lifelessly. A wave of horror crashes over Jamie as he discovers that his father's entire back has been hollowed out, with a wooden rod propping him upright. It is then that the terrible truth is revealed. His stepmother is the perfect doll that Mary had been striving to create. Though she appears human, she is in reality one of Mary's cursed creations. Mary had possessed her, using her as a vessel to carry out her revenge. She had married Jamie's father, then slaughtered him. Now, she manipulates his lifeless body like a ventriloquist's puppet, luring Jamie closer to end the last surviving member of his bloodline. As the film reaches its end, Jamie narrates once more the haunting nursery rhyme about Mary. The portraits lining the mansion's hallway bear a sinister transformation. All of Jamie's family members have been turned into dolls.